Habari gani, karibuni. Welcome to our Kumbukeni family. Thank you again for being here with us today. Thank you for supporting us since we started this January and showing so much love. We are now heading towards 800 subscriptions, and we appreciate you all for staying on with us throughout our conversations every Sunday. My name again is Nduku. I am a Black African woman. I mean, I don't need to say I'm Black. You can all see African woman who is done with the imperialists and the exploitation of Africa and is choosing to take action against it. And one way I'm doing so is joining my brothers, Ali Madi and Adesoji, to tell the African story from an African perspective. Adesoji, Ali Madi.
Yes, again, good evening to us, Brother Milton will categorize as the Open University, Africa's Open University.
I do like it.
Yes, the name is Adesoji Ginla, as we'll say in Yoruba, Kudede Woyi, which is good evening and good day. Yeah, reaching you from the belly of the beast, the heart of empire, you know.
I don't know if you should own that anymore. I feel like you're calling bad juju on yourself.
The one that owes, you know, that gave you the language you're all speaking, you know. Hopefully you don't all turn away from it in the search for in the search for new independence. Yes, welcome to Kumbukeni once again. Brother Milton.
Karibuni, comrades, friends, sisters and brothers, from wherever you're tuning in to our global university. Kumbukeni, of course, evokes the memories of our ancestors. Many of them actually provide the blueprint. We're not implementing the blueprint. And that is the reason we're having a lot of the challenges in our contemporary times. So now and then in our conversations, we try to weave in some of those blueprints, and hopefully we'll do the same today. Milton Alimadi here from New York City. The declining global empire.
See, I see that's a better way of doing it, Adesoji. Instead of owning that, listen.
The empire that's most scared of Brics. Back to you, sister.
All right. Today, our conversation is going to be on Brics, which is an acronym that represents the unity of nations that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they just had a summit, I believe it was August 22nd to 24th in South Africa, because this year South Africa is the chairing nation of the unity, and each chairing nations, to my understanding from the research that I've done, gets to host every year that they chair, and the chair rotation goes annually. So yes, this year it was in South Africa, hosted by South Africa. The theme was chosen by South Africa from August 22nd to the 24th, and we're here to discuss that and the general entity that is Brics. We will start with an opening from our historian in chief, I guess I will say, Adesoji. This is his fond. It's his expertise. He likes the history of it. So myself and Ali Madi have said, you know what? Have at it, brother. Tell us about Brics.
Yes. Brics would come into the general lexicon in 2001, being the acronym formed by the Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill. Jim O'Neill has been monitoring the economies of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So in 2001, he wrote a report, you know, and the report was looking at the growth of these previously 4 economies. But in 2010, BRICS will become BRICS, meaning South Africa then becomes the S. So now you have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Why is it important that we not only accord this moment its due recognition? Is the first that since the Bandung Conference of 1955, when such ideas have been mooted about forming a bloc that is not west or east, but is one that should encompass the needs of the global majority, This would represent the first stab at it post the Cold War, and is not without its challenges, many of which we'll go into in the course of our discussion. But it's important to just give you some numbers. In terms of GDP, which is how the economists would like to look through things, which is numbers, Brazil last year had a GDP of $2.8 trillion. Russia, $2.6 trillion. India, $3.7 trillion. China, $19.37 trillion. I repeat that number again, $19.37 trillion. South Africa comes in a moderate 399, just one short of $400 billion. It would have been nice if the country like Nigeria was involved initially, because Nigeria holds another 1.4 trillion. But we'll talk about all of that in the course of our conversation. But suffice to say, those numbers combined together in terms of just the economic power and also the people within that power, they constitute 34% of the global population. If we go back to a book we're all familiar with, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, he also brings into scope that if Africa were to draw on the strength of numbers and back that up by economic and industrial development, the world will truly be our oyster. So that, in a nutshell, is the formative understanding behind Brics, which is one, yes, they don't all ideological believe. I mean, in the course of our conversation, we'll go in depth into it. They're not all ideologically intertwined, but they understand one thing. Just like the hands on the the fingers on the hand, they're not all equal, but they all perform a very important function. And so that is Brics in a nutshell.
So I was listening to one of the videos, Asante Adesoji, listening to one of the videos covering Brics, of the speakers there. And one of them said that in the opening on the 22nd, that Brics' goal is to push against the toxic colonial history culture. And so if that is their goal, I'm here for it. But let's talk about why this particular summit is so important. When we came up with this question and I was thinking about it, I was thinking to myself, is it the fact that it's Africa and Africa has been fought for years? The fact that the other entities that are competing against Brics, the US being one of them, are now nervous because Brics is going for partnership in Africa, and they're talking about industrializing Africa, which then is going to be a threat to their economies and the way they relate with Africa. So why is this summit, my brothers Adesoji and Alimadi, why is it so important as opposed to all the others?
This, just to give us an entry point, this summit is important in the sense that it underscored what they've been working behind the scenes for a very long time. The issue in Ukraine is one. The issue of financing the global economy, the unstable nature of the Sahel region in Africa is another. South America also comes into question with the recent elections in Brazil that brought back Lula da Silva. So it formed a reset of what needs to happen. And only recently, China bought IMF's debt, Argentina's IMF debt. So essentially meaning Argentina is now indebted to China as opposed to the IMF. If we're all familiar, only a couple of months ago, China actually rescheduled most of these loans that are owned by African countries, which is something the IMF and the World Bank have not done in a while. So it's not without understanding that it forms this summit, not only underscores it, but also charts a course for the future to say, this is where we need to go and this is how we need to do it. Of course, the West will see the summit or the entire, body as a threat to his hegemony, but should they be? The only reason they probably would be is because they're well aware of what can transpire if they're upstage. So Brics is not coming to upstage the West per se, but it's coming to act as a counterweight. So if you have a choice in the market, you can decide within your own needs to say, this is where I need to go forward with, or I choose not, or I choose to go with my old foes. Hopefully, most of these countries would, realign their course, obviously. But hey, at least now we have a choice.
So my thing, as you say that, Adesoji, that I've been hearing, and that actually I have been observing, is that the focus is not necessarily on all members of BRICS, but so much on China and Russia, and that China and Russia have been controlling the conversation. From when I was doing my research, I saw that a lot of times Russia was the one proposing the policies and the new projects to be taken on. Alimadi, what do you think about that? The fact that there's this accusation that, yes, it appears from the outside that it's a unity of now 5 nations, but China and Russia are focusing.
Okay, so first of all, thanks, Comrade Adesoji, for that wonderful historical summation. Actually, it was very good. I like the way you tied it with the Bandung conference, of course, which was very historic in Indonesia, in trying to determine how these formerly colonized, formerly dominated countries should chart a new path for themselves that does not involve subjugation or submitting to the will of Western capital. So in that sense, you are correct in drawing the analysis in the emergence of BRICS as that second attempt. I think probably a better attempt, because I think when you have too many countries at the same time, it becomes a little unwieldy. And I think that's why they're going a little bit more systematic way in terms of growing BRICS. Obviously, I think it's important that the country that is joining should have a large population. That would help. If you have a large economy as well, that would help. If you don't have a large population, but you have a large economy, that would also help. And I think that's why the UAE country and Saudi Arabia were admitted. So now, in terms of when we say Russia and China dominating the conversation, I think when you mention Russia, it's purely because of the current, political environment in terms of the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, which is in fact an indirect war between Russia and the United States. And that's why when covered in Western media, the focus is on what Russia is saying about BRICS. But I don't think that once they sit down and they start these meetings, everybody's going to be saying, Russia, what do you have to say? I think on the contrary, they would be more interested in proposals and suggestions coming from the ones with the bigger economies. And it's a good thing Adesoji also provided the background, the breakdown for us. And of course, that would be China, and then followed by Brazil and India, rather, and then followed by Brazil. So if you look at in terms of the economic base, I would not say that Russia is dictating the conversation. I think whatever Russia says is being much more covered by Western corporate media because, and they may be correct in saying that Russia now needs more needs BRICS more than ever. But Russia has been a formative member. So that doesn't even make an interesting news angle. If Russia was just applying and joining for the first time, that could be an interesting news angle. So I think they're really, they're grasping for straws, essentially, and trying to divert the conversation. And you look at some other parts of the conversation that in corporate media, oh, well, this thing, what's the possibility that it will become sustainable?
Mm-hmm.
China and India, they have their issues over the borders. Well, which country does not have issues? Even the Western countries, they have issues amongst themselves as well. The G7 countries, they're not on the same page. They don't have solid written agreements that determine membership in G7 or how they should conduct themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should try to, not fall into the temptation of seeing what they're writing as what is actually happening on the ground. I think BRICS, of course, was formed and it was dismissed initially. When it was formed, they were literally laughing at it. Oh, this is another attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Because they view everything in the sense of anything that is not dominated by the West is not normal. It's a deviation, you see?
AKA white supremacy.
Yes, it's a deviation from that as well. So they were dismissed, but in the time period from 2001 up to now, the share of the BRICS countries' global share of GDP has actually risen from 8% in 2001 to 26% prior to the admission of these new members, 6 members. So now the share would go up to 34%. That's what it is now. And in terms of global trade, 46%. Adesoji gave us the population.
Mm-hmm.
It was 41% before, and now with the admission of these new members, they come 58%. And these numbers really, because you know how these countries, particularly the United States, always so overly focused on these numbers. And they're important, but they somehow push it to astronomical levels sometimes. And, we who live in this country understand how it operates. I'm number one. I'm number one. I'm number one. So if you have a even athletic competition, right? 100 meters. Number one is the only winner. Number two, who cares about you? Even if both of you set new records for yourselves. In this country, the narrative is only number one matters.
Matters, yeah.
So they're covering BRICS from that perspective as well.
Yeah.
So they're bothered that BRICS now would control 58% of the global population. And it's on one level, okay, it's an impressive number. But on another level, it's also meaningless. Are you telling me that the countries that make up the membership of the BRICS, every citizen in those countries are going to Google and say, oh, let me see what BRICS is saying, how I should behave? So that's what sometimes we blow these numbers into meaningless proportion. And it goes back to GDP.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you posed the question even before our conversation, but the meaning of GDP. GDP measures all economic activities in each country, domestic activities, and then, of course, also with your foreign trade. GNP is just domestic. When you put GDP, now you also actually I mix it around. GDP is domestic.
Yeah.
GNP also includes your imports and trades. You aggregate that, whether it's a surplus, whether it's a deficit in your trade, and then you come up with the sum total, and that becomes the measure of economic activity. But as you know, a lot of economic activity in African countries are so-called informal.
Are not recorded.
Producing their goods on the farms and then going to the local
market.
They're not as valued.
The local markets, a lot of economic activity, a lot of transactions ongoing in the urban areas that are not measured and aggregated. So when they say that a country like Uganda has a per capita income of $800 per year, who can survive with $800 for a year? It's completely meaningless in that sense. Now, it's also meaningful in terms of assessing where things are going, because it's distorted for Uganda, it's distorted for Kenya, it's distorted for Ghana. So at least we know it's distorted everywhere. So if we see a growth in Uganda from 800 to 1,000, it's still being under measuring economic activity. But at least we get a sense that what is measurable is steadily increasing. The same thing for Kenya, same thing for Ghana. So in that sense, it makes sense. In all other sense, in the sense that can somebody survive with $800 a year? Of course not. In that sense, it does not make sense.
It's interesting that you put that perspective to it, because I'm thinking of all the barter trade that still goes on in Africa that helps people survive, that is not considered. I'm hearing an echo. I'm sorry.
No, I agree with you. So when you say the GDP of, I think you gave us of, did you give us of an African country? I don't think
no, we can get into it, because we're gonna get into the individual members, and we can talk about
GDP is 112 billion. That's under measured. It could actually be, who knows, 300 billion. You see, for Kenya it's 110 billion. It could easily be 300 billion as well.
Because you have things like someone who gives a goat in exchange of a certain amount of money, like things like that, or in exchange of another service, and that's not counted by the West because it's not considered a mode of exchange based on their economics.
Or rather, the goat is slaughtered and then it's produced in nyama choma
for a whole community.
That is not measured,
right?
Yeah.
No, I hear you on that. Our African ways of economy or economics are not measured. So, Adesoji, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that. And I'm glad you mentioned the media, Milton, because we're going to get into it. The different headlines that we encountered. I think that's going. I was laughing the whole time, and like dissecting the words that they're using and analyzing them. But Adesoji, this whole idea of Russia and China dominating the conversation.
So the before we break down the nitty-gritty of language being used in the Western media, it will also be important to understand the synergy behind the initial grouping of the members as to what they each bring to the table. I mean, on the surface alone, numbers being what it is. But numbers is not what makes them key. What makes them key is the fact that China has the industrial power, Russia has the military might, India technology, China, mixing them up. Okay, so Brazil is essentially a window by virtue of being part of the Organization of American States and access into the American markets. So if we produce anything using the industrial base of Brazil, we can effectively gain a foothold into the American market. Can you see how you're bringing power to play without necessarily bringing a gun?
Yeah.
So you're using agreements, which is what was used to colonize Africans in the first place. You were forced to sign treaties that you clearly did not know the lettering of. But now China is playing on the fact that you have a gentleman agreements in place. If you produce anything in Brazil, it is Brazil produced. So it is native to the Americas. It can enter the American market. It can enter the Canadian market. So it gives you this access to move around. And, so now if you bring in South Africa is the bottom of the continent. It is also the second largest economy on the continent after Nigeria. You're in. With the new members that have just joined, Ethiopia and Egypt. Egypt controls the Suez Canal. That is how you think strategically. You don't necessarily sometimes have to bring military might, guns and everything. Just think. Use geography.
Correct.
And I like that you're bringing strategy to it, because some questions in the audience that I'm looking forward to us getting to when we get to that time are speaking to this, and I'm looking forward to us responding to them.
So I mean, let's even take it a little bit further. Something happened March 10, 2023 this year. I was monitoring the news as I normally would do, and I just saw this picture. I was like, this is strange. Why? What's going on here? I saw the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia and the foreign minister of Iran shaking hands with the Chinese foreign minister within them.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yep.
And so I looked at that picture. I'm like, what? Has the West seen this picture? Because when you see stuff like that, you immediately know.
They probably did, which is why all the propaganda started coming out.
They started running around, scratching their heads. What's going on here?
Yeah.
Why? That is 34% of the entire oil reserves of the world in that picture.
And after that picture, now Iran and Saudi Arabia are coming to join
Brics
as members. And not just that, between that picture and them joining, China, you see headlines saying China brokers the reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
And also, here is how you begin to see the power play. I think a couple of months ago, I think it was June to be exact. Yes, when the oil price was going up, and Biden asked the MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, to increase oil production, and he said no. It's like, we're talking back now. Okay, so things are.
People have been doing some national
and
push-ups.
you don't hear Biden talking about the murder of that journalist.
Exactly. Now you begin to see how this guy is not
where
only
the leverage lies.
Exactly. And sometimes you don't have to, for me it was the entire Brics thing is like watching what's his name? Che Guevara write a novel. It's like, just wait, you will get them. And brick by brick, when they were going for the Brics summit.
Was that pun intended? He said brick by brick.
Yeah, exactly. You caught that one. You caught it. As they were going for this, as they were going for the latest, as they were going for this summit, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called MBS in for a meeting. And it's no gainsaying to say what the meeting was about, because effectively it was like, should you go, look out for your friends, But the guy said, okay, I'll come, I'll listen, and that's it. And then he goes. And they had to bring in his friend, King Charles, to, faith him so that at least maybe you might be listening. But we all know that didn't really work because the guy is going. And now they're so afraid that even France is applying to join Brics.
Yeah, and they got the big no. You're not welcome.
At least, you're not welcome until the house is settled.
Now,
that's it.
Come back
That's
to
it.
the table,
And it will be on our terms.
we will provide capital on extremely concessionist terms for industrialization. Then Brics will say, okay, let's have a conversation.
So
ultimately, would be the ultimate benefit for African countries.
Yeah,
having membership in Brics.
Yeah. I don't know if we want to get to the specific nations, the Brazil, the Russia, the China, the India, the China, and the South Africa, and talk about their economies. So we can start with Brazil. What is Brazil bringing to the table? And I know you gave a general summation of what they're bringing, the strategic benefit of having the member nations. But now let's go a little deeper, just a little bit. What is Brazil bringing to the table as far as economics and being a beneficial member of Brics?
Okay, so usually when you look at any relationship, the first thing you look at is the potential. Brazil is a growing economy. Yes. Last year it was 2.8 billion. On this year, the projection is they will go maybe 2.5, 2.7, 2.9.
You're talking about the GDP?
Yeah, the GDP.
I got it at 1.92 trillion in 2022.
So
I think he's talking about, okay, I think you need to clarify for the sister. I think her question was not the size of the GDP, I think the economic growth rate. I think
the economic growth.
That's what Adesoji is talking about. Okay.
They adding on to, because now you're trading
that
with
makes sense,
much more, you're not, the trade is not speculative, but rather based on agreed understanding that I am doing trade with you. So it's not a one-off. It's now a concerted effort of what it intends to be. And so you've got Brazil's got natural resources, it's got gas, it's got oil, so biodiversity is another issue. And the Amazon jungle, by virtue of where it is, means not only would Brics be pulling in on that muscle, you're also gaining an understanding of how, if you truly want to tackle global change, climate change, you have the lab to work with it. So Brazil is essentially going to be where it's going to be a test case for how it should be done.
I mean, and there's the trade advantage that you were talking about, because they are members of the G20, the World Trade Organization, Paris Club, the G8 and 5.
And also the Organization of American States.
So there's that.
Another critical thing, which is very critical, in fact, are the banks. Brazil has large banks with large capital base. And, it's all about access to financing, right?
Yes.
So Brazil can become a source of financing for countries that like Ethiopia, for example, like Egypt, the countries that are on the lower end of the scale in terms of the BRIC members.
In terms of the BRICS that they bring.
Brazil initially, Samir Amin, the late Samir Amin, pointed to Brazil and China as two countries that could make a revolutionary transformative impact on African countries in terms of providing capital for economic development, for industrialization, without the kind of, and that of course is the primary interest in membership in BRICS, an alternative source of financing that does not come with the structural adjustment conditionalities of the World Bank and the IMF.
The limitations, right? Yeah. All right, let's dive into Russia. I usually deal with BRICS in order of their acronyms, because sometimes it can get confusing. So Russia, let's get into Russia.
So Russia is, most people probably won't know, is one of the largest exporter of oil and gas, slash, based on the size of Russia alone, it sits part Europe, part Asia. It also has access to one oil reserve that is yet to be tapped, which is the Caspian Sea. And so that again means power. You need, in order to funnel any development, you need gas, you need oil. And so you've got that in Russia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. So the size alone of those reserves and the access to the amount you need is critical to how BRICS would move forward. With those guys on board, that is essentially unbridled power that you can call on anytime. And Russia and China have already signed a pipeline deal. And so that's the formative stages of what is supposed to come on stream. And once that does, even India, funny enough, we're going to India next, but while the world sanctions Russia for its oil, India is still buying oil from Russia and
And China
selling
too.
it.
And
And
China too.
exactly, and selling it onto the international market.
Yeah.
So
Strategy.
again, strategy is key. Sometimes you don't need to lift a finger. The world will
Okay, I think actually I just suggested two things. And sorry to interrupt you. I'll let you continue.
go on.
Strategy, and that is why the Western corporate media, and by extension, the West, are just going nuts about what is going on. And that's why Brics, this year's meeting, has this particular top level focus and attention in terms of the coverage because of the dynamics of economic activity that followed the sanctions against Russia as a result of the Russia-Ukraine war, and thinking that Russia would collapse, under the weight of these sanctions. On the contrary, it's now Russia's shifted into all these other economic arrangements that Adesoji is referring to. So that is also one of the major impacts of this year's Brics meeting.
And it also had a great unexpected positive outcome in their nation, where their agricultural industry became stronger because of the sanctions, because now they could focus on farming within instead of importing food items from the other countries. So I was happy to see that, because that is what I hope that Africa will do.
Well, that was what I was about to say.
Yeah.
As I'm listening to you say that.
Yeah.
And that has been the problem. We have not learned from those oppressive conditions imposed upon us, because obviously we need to have uniform game plan to survive the backlash, and that's what Thomas Sankara was advocating.
Yeah.
And now, and this is a conversation for another time, but now that example, when ECOWAS threatened to invade Niger, the heads of France, and Mali and Burkina Faso came out and declared that we would consider that an invasion of our countries. That is the kind of Pan-African solidarity that should be extended to other activities, including economic activities. Because had they not come out and made that statement, ECOWAS would have invaded by now. So that was very significant. But continue, Adesoji.
Okay, so yes, we were talking India earlier. Let's not forget, majority of Silicon Valley at the moment is run by Indians. All your Google, they're literally, Indians are, excuse me, they control the tech space at the moment. And so pulling in on that strength means technologically going forward, China with its size can draw in on that strength, as opposed to them going to the Americas.
And of course, China also has this level of
China does have Chinese,
But it would excuse me, it would deter from the accusation of them, quote unquote, hacking and what have you. Now you have partners.
They do hack.
Libani's like, let's.
No, they do hack.
No, they do.
We have to be straight. Listen, the West plundered from all over the world and built up the West. And at a certain point, countries like China, like Japan, they started stealing from the West, who had benefited from their technology. We're the ones who have not yet now. Now we are begging.
I'm glad you said we're the ones.
Return our hard work. Okay, maybe eventually they've started returning that.
I'm glad you said we're the
beyond
ones.
That, we need to be involved in acquiring technology by any means necessary as well.
Africa needs to talk to
Everybody
China
does.
and learn how to hack and start hacking as well. I am glad you said that, because this is what as some people might think my statement is careless and not being cautionary of who may be listening. Here's the thing. You have an entity that has been doing something to you to oppress you. Why would you, as intelligent people, not say, hey, maybe we need to do the same to them to find out what they're up to? And that's what China is good at. Or you want to hack us? hold on, we're going to learn how to do it, and we're going to do it even better to you. So I'm here for it. Go on though.
Okay, so I mean, still on the subject of information technology.
Yes.
Well,
and now we're in India. We might as well continue with India.
No, only last week, India landed a craft on the moon, and so that's the beginning of a nucleus of another frontier that you can build on. So what is India? What will be India's benefit from the entire arrangement? It is access to that number. Yes, India currently has 1.1 billion people, but if you can have access beyond that 1.1 billion people, and you also have a growing population, you don't have an aging population, which is a strength in itself. It means not only do you have the technology, you have the knowledge, you can export said knowledge. Imagine what that would bring into the Indian economy. So if we then go to the elephant in the room, which is China.
We need to find a replacement for elephant, like we said with the but go on, Adesoji.
Well, elephant is considered one of the wisest. It's the wisest animal in the animal kingdom, and is also led by. Is also one of the few animal species led by women, led by matriarch. So.
I'll never forget anything.
Exactly. So.
By the way, I might forget this, before you move too far, I want to go back and just make this quick comment as well. In terms of the histories, because the history is obviously very important as well. And even though we don't talk about it constantly, it's always in the undercurrent, the subcurrent, right? Russia, of course, went through that stage of the Soviet Union, right? When they kicked out the Tsar. And after the Russian Revolution, we conveniently forget that the West intervened actively, militarily, to try to reverse the revolution and try to get people like Lenin killed at the initial stages. So, the Russians don't forget that, right? Even though it's not part of a conversation like this. China had the same kind of history with the Opium Wars. Right, against China. So that also forms the foundation of the countries that were historically dominated.
Even India.
By the Brics,
So while the Western media are talking about, will this concept survive? China and India have their, border problems. That history that all these countries know are never brought up in these corporate media coverage of these events. So I just wanted to interject that in.
I mean, we can also say, Adesoji, did you remember your thought? I saw we had
No.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, with China being, quote unquote, the factory of the world, has been exposed to so many technologies, from Tesla to Apple phones, Microsoft, and what have you. Yes, through nefarious means, they've been able to garner more. But one thing China has been key about is this technology would be used to further the essence of humanity. It is the one reason why they don't have a blue navy. And for those with navigational know-how, when you have a blue navy, it means you're going out to war. You're going outside of your sphere of influence.
You're looking for trouble.
Exactly. The navy they have is one that defends their territory. They have no need to go out. It's not that the People Revolutionary Army cannot pick up guns and decide, let's march into the next country. But for them, that's not their thing.
They're treating others as they want to be treated.
And again, so tying in with history, it's like we'll defend this spot. Japan also had a bite of colonialism with regards to the Chinese. So they're well aware of what it means to be dominated or to be, And there's a famous phrase they have, which is, we'll never go back to the 100 years of humiliation, which is 1840 to 1940. So anything between that timeline, they is constantly drummed into these kids that this is what we don't want you to lose. And so Brics offers them a window, a gateway to be able to further the cause of humanity, as opposed to what we're constantly aware of, which is if you don't do trade with if you don't do trade with us, we're going to sanction you, or bomb you to the Stone Age, as what happened in Libya, what happened in Iraq. And it's funny that those two examples, that why did they happen? It happened because both leaders at the time talked about using an alternative currency to the dollar. So now, only a couple of months ago, Janet Yellen went to China, seeking that China buy more treasury bills. And the Chinese finance minister said, no, we're not buying bills. And she said, to quote her word for word, she said, if you don't buy our bills, the United States might start acting irrationally. He said, well, carry on. Do what you got to do. So...
Wait, repeat that again. Not doing what?
That if you don't buy our treasury bills, the United States might start acting irrationally.
It's just that now? They're just starting?
I don't speak English, so I don't know what irrationally means.
I thought you did say you were in the
But she said you were going to start acting rationally. So again, we move on to what's it called? South Africa. Why South Africa?
Before you get to
still on India, yes. Mm-hmm.
I want to, India.
Or China. Both India and China, since we talked about them together.
In an interview, and this interesting interview, it's by an Indian journalist named Saeed Naqvi. The last name is Naqvi, and it's on YouTube. He had a very interesting interview with Julius Nyerere.
What's the name of the YouTube video?
I think it's interview of Julius Nyerere.
Okay.
To the Tanzanian, the former president by that time, by Saeed Naqvi, and his first name is spelled Saed. And one of the things that Nyerere said was that part of the problem in the global South is that we are always looking to the north for everything. The grass is greener on the other side. He said, India may have its challenges, but India has all the technology that the other South countries that are not that technologically advanced actually need. But they would rather go to Europe or the United States at a higher cost rather than dealing with India. And he said he understands that concept, and he's seen it even in Tanzania itself. Even things that can be produced in Tanzania, things that Tanzania has, the tendency is to look from outside, because what is outside is always better than what you have at home. So now, as a member of the Brics, India may be in a better position now for the technological transfer with other African countries that eventually
we're losing.
Yeah, no, we're getting you. You're in the matrix, brother Ali Madi. No, it's really bad. Okay, I'm just gonna take you out real quick and come back in. Adesoji, we're talking about India.
Okay.
I was also looking when we were talking about, I was in the middle of typing something which threw me off. But also India with its agricultural industry, the wheat and tea being the largest producer of those two right after China. So speak on that.
Okay, so before coming on to tea and production, we're also missing one very key, vital aspect of India's advancement: medicine. In the 1990s, when the AIDS epidemic was, ravaging the African continent. With what Brother Milton said before he got caught in the matrix, that we're constantly looking to the West for drugs, for stuff, and drugs being one of them, medicine. And so when it became very, very expensive, because, the pharmaceutical companies knew you needed drugs and you had to get your drugs one way or the other to use it but it was unsustainable. And so Africa then looked to India for cheap viral alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what the West did? They actually went into...
A new policy?
No, they went into Congress and passed a bill to sanction South Africa and, at that time, Congo from buying drugs elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because you can't buy a cheap alternative of what they're producing.
So the U.S. Congress went to their Congress and
the pharmaceutical industry went to
the U.S. Congress and lobbied for a policy to protect their industry so that African countries who are outside in another continent cannot buy medicines from India on another continent.
Correct.
And the Indians, or the African countries, I should say, said yes, Amasa, instead of questioning that and saying hell no.
Not that they said no. I think that would be too simplistic. It was the fact that the companies in India that were producing these generic alternatives were sanctioned by the American government. So you're sanctioned.
So that means they don't have funding to continue the work that they're doing. They're not producing.
Exactly. And also your money is tied in the economic system.
They're getting money from the IMF and the World Bank.
So the pharmaceutical industry in India deals with the pharmaceutical companies in the West.
Yeah.
So in the course of your interaction, your money will be tied up. If a sizable chunk of your money is held in the Western banks, and fun fact here, there are more $100 bills outside the United States than in the United States.
I agree, unfortunately.
I repeat, there are more $100 bills outside the United States than in the United States. Why is that? They hold this dollar in that form so that against inflation. So if you do not have that loose change, you are subject to the whims and caprices of what the currency market does. So that being the case, none of these companies wanted to be sanctioned. And so they effectively stopped. The African companies, the African countries, again, because using the dollar to trade, could not also access what they need in order to buy whatever. So you're caught in a catch-2 situation now. You're not only unable to afford the drugs in the West, you can't buy the drug in the East from India. So guess what happened? People were literally dying, were falling. You had grandmothers taking care of grandchildren. So effectively wiping out the middle generation. And so people suffered. So Brics is coming in to ensure that that is not the case going forward. And so if it comes to fruition and all of the other companies bring their, bring their power to bear, let me even give you one. Argentina recently got accepted as part of Brics.
Why don't you talk about that? The 6 that have been introduced, since we haven't mentioned. Just name them all and then speak on Argentina.
Okay, so Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. So we've spoken about what Iran and Saudi Arabia brings to the fore. Essentially, oil. UAE as well, oil. So let's group those 3 together. The other 2, Egypt. Egypt controls the access to a very key access to world trade. The Suez Canal. The Suez Canal cuts the travel time between South America between the Americas to South America.
And just to make it, hold that thought, I hope I don't lose you. Just to make it clear to the people, remember sometime last year or the year before that, there was an incident where there was a ship stuck in that area and it affected a lot of areas.
A lot of trade. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Suez Canal controls the better part of trade into the Americas. Mm-hmm. That's Egypt's strength. That is what Egypt is bringing. Mm-hmm. Egypt is bringing that might. Yeah. I mean, we're not discounting, obviously, what they produce in terms of food and what have you.
They have good agricultural, industry there.
But the key strategic input from Egypt is the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
With Ethiopia, it is size. And also they've been able to not only dam the Nile, the power that will come from damming the Nile is going to help power that region. And also it means if you have stable power, younger population, you can build industries. These guys can come in and invest. Mm-hmm. So again, all of this strategy. Then Argentina. What does Argentina bring? What is the most popular thing right now in the world?
Is that a trick question?
In terms of electronics, what's the most important thing? What's the key buzzword? Electric cars.
Ah, okay.
Electric cars. Argentina holds 35% of the world reserves in lithium.
Mm.
Hello? And its neighbor in the north, Ecuador, is also another receptacles of of lithium. In fact, the proprietor of or the owner of formerly known as Twitter, now X, Musk, when the president was overthrown, constitutionally overthrown, Evo Morales, and he chimed in and he said, well, we can, what's the word he used? We're the United States and we can coup anyone.
Right.
We can effectively remove anyone. Mm-hmm. If Ecuador joins the mix, joins Brics, that will become
it's time to send the United States a memo and let them know that those days are gone. I was happy when you were talking about China and you said they have this thing where they say we will never return to the times of our humiliation. And I hope Africa does embrace that. And by Africa, I mean global Africa, the global Africans. I hope we embrace that motto of we will never return to the times of our humiliation. And anything that threatens us to going back there, we will stand against. But had you finished your point before we move on to the media?
So I'm just trying to tie up the economic cooperation thing. Now, the one thing that has been the stranglehold on most of this economy has been the issue of finance and how finance is structured. Mm-hmm. So the finance within the IMF and World Bank, as we know it, is pretty horrendous. There is no other way of saying it. But these guys have money, they have technology, they have people, and they have resources. So we're not talking about just service provision. We're talking about technology, money, resources. If you weave them all together, you've got the perfect instrument to not only safeguard humanity, but also, the growth of humanity. Because the way the world is currently going, when you have 1% owing more than the other 99.9% of the world population, you begin to understand where the problem is. And that in itself is unsustainable. I'm talking about the C word in the room without mentioning capitalism. It's unsustainable. And so, yes, there will be winners and losers, but there will be, in this case, there will be more winners because China has done it in the sense that China has shown it can be done by, moving people from poverty into middle class. And it's done it on such a grand scale that model can actually be copied elsewhere. And if that model is copied elsewhere, just imagine all those people that are dying in the Mediterranean. I mean, only last week, a boat went down off the coast of Senegal. Shocking thing that in this day and age, where the world is interconnected, we are struggling to, find solutions to basic problems, which is one of needs and what have you. But again, Brics is the way to go. A is the way to go. So, it's gonna help reform so many things.
Adesoji, just to break it up before we get, because I wanted you to speak on Samir Amin's I guess warnings to us. But before we get into that, let's just run through some headlines that we encountered and break it down quickly as we wait for our brother Alimadi to rejoin us. So and this now we're covering the Western media's perspective on what goes on elsewhere, right? How they narrate the story of others. This is the white gaze, how they want to portray. It's the false narrative of what is happening outside of the false notion of white supremacy, right? Because they believe that only they can rule, only they can control trade, only they can control the mode of exchange, which is the dollar. So when they hear that something else is coming, what are they saying as far as that goes? One of the French papers that I encountered, it's called Le Monde. Its headline was "The Brics countries aim to knock the dollar off its throne." Adesoji. I'll read mine. Let me read all mine and then we can get into it. You can share yours. There was New York Times. Brics summit attracts global interests not seen in years. New York Times again. Putin tries to rally support at a much-watched Brics summit. There you go with that focus on Russia when it's really not. Guardian. Major expansion as economic bloc that includes Russia and China attempts to provide counterweight to the US and Western allies. Al Jazeera. Hegemonism not in China's DNA. Xi calls for Brics expansion. So let's take it.
Okay, so I mean, you could run through even Financial Times. You could run through which is the money paper here. You could run through Wall Street Journal, the Times. It's funny that you started with Le Monde. Le Monde is establishment paper. Le Monde, I thought you were going to quote Figaro. If you had quoted Figaro and they said something quite different, then, because Figaro is left-leaning. And so
Le Monde, remember, there's this threat that apparently US and French relations are at risk. So go on, though.
Okay, so Le Monde is much more, it's an imperialist rag. It's always advocate. I mean, there's nothing wrong with advocating for one's interest, but doing it so brazenly obvious that your needs should surmount everyone's other, every other person's thoughts. Now, should we be surprised? No. Well, you shouldn't be surprised, and the reason I say that is, why did France decide they ought to join Brics? Because they know that is where the world is looking to right now. And so if we do not join Brics now, we'll be dictated to in the course of joining later. Because these guys don't come with a notion of working in collective structures. They come with one of dominating. one of dominating what everybody thinks in terms of this is how we want it. I mean, I'll give you an example. Look at the Security Council.
Yeah.
The Security Council has existed post Second World War, now 1945, and has not been reformed. Yes, you have the overarching, you have 5 permanent security members, and then you have the 10 that has a annual stab at whatever it is they do in there. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the other 5, with the exception of Russia and China, you have the United States, Britain, and France. You could look at their economic inputs into the world through how they operate in the IMF or the World Bank. I mean, surely the key is understanding how the organization came to be. It was part of the Bretton Woods Agreement, following on from the Atlantic Charter, which was a discussion between Teddy Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. Now, bringing those two organizations in, they formed, the United Nations from the League of Nations. From the League of Nations, they spawned the World Bank, the IMF, and NATO. So, what was NATO? NATO was effectively their policeman. It was like, if we do deals with you or you don't choose to trade with us, we'll send the boogeyman in. So Brics is here to act as a security and political cooperation. I saw in the chat earlier, somebody mentioned the fact that when the US threatened to invade Venezuela, Russia sent in 2 jets. Now imagine if that was the case for everywhere for Gaddafi or Iraq. Would you have had those 2 wars? Highly unlikely. Yeah. Because one thing is sure, and Americans, forgive me for this, beyond the First World War, which was a collective effort, there has not been one war that has been fought for the benefit of humanity.
And even then, Alimadi argued, and I agree with him, from the get-go, it was for the sake of resources and access to resources. Even then.
No, yeah. That was what the war was for. Mm-hmm. And when I say humanity, in the sense that you had
to defend
the Jewish Holocaust. Mm-hmm. So we can't decry that atrocity. Mm-hmm. But I'm saying that was the rallying cry. Mm-hmm. Yes, we understand that there were economic undertones to what the war was about, because it was, after all, it was it was the Versailles Treaty. Mm-hmm. And the stringent nature of the Versailles Treaty, meaning Germany would lose Togo, Cameroon, Namibia, and Tanzania.
It was still Africa even then.
So losing access to those places meant eventually, and also the reparations they had to pay to the others, meant not only did they lose resources, not only did they lose access to resources, they were actually losing resources they were working to gain. Now, so when I pose the thought that there's not been a war that has been fought on the needs of humanity, I was bringing in the Jewish Holocaust. And so, fast forward now, every war going forward since that time has been, if you look closely, has been clearly one that has been fought on the pedestal of capitalism. Mm-hmm. Vietnam War, the Korean War, which other one? The escapes
the second one.
No, there is another one. The Korean War, the
okay. Come back. Yeah, stay.
Now
And-
I can't hear you though.
Okay, so you can. And so, why do I mention all of this? I mention all of this so that I've been in spaces where the issue of BRICS came up. And the refrain for most people have been, oh, yes, we had the economic power, but don't forget, we also have military power. So my question to that person was, what are you going to do with the military power? You're going to bomb people to playing with you? The world has moved on. How many people can you bomb? Well, I mean, you do have the zero weapons. By that, I mean nuclear weapons. You can bomb people into smithereens.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So I had said we were going to go to Samir Amin's analysis of BRICS, but I think we should have another show and talk about BRICS, and from this, from have one specifically talking about Samir Amin and Sheikh Antidote on this subject. Just do that. Have another conversation on BRICS that focuses on the two of them. Let me just see if our brother is ready to join us.
No, I mean, I could quickly mention what Samir Amin says. And
hold on, Adesoji, quickly. Ali Madi, you good? No? All right. Go on, Adesoji.
Okay, so Samir Amin essentially says...
Hold on real quick. Yes, Ali Madi? Yeah, forget it. Sorry. Go on.
So Samir Amin essentially just says, well, for any relationship, be it economic or, political, cultural, or whatever, just be wary of what has happened. That's the nutshell. It's not saying BRICS is the panacea to all problems. And like I said at the beginning, I didn't say it was going to cure all ills. It is simply going to act like a counterweight. And, maybe with the presence of BRICS, the West might start acting properly. That is one thing people are not, that listen, okay, what is it you want? Is this what you want? Okay, we'll give it to you. Again, it's been strategic.
The not so obvious pressures.
Exactly. So if we take something, if we immediately judge a book by its cover, but without flicking the pages, we might not be aware that there are nuggets of information that we can use in our, in our travails as to how to navigate this space that we called the global space.
I'm glad you said that, because it goes to the question that one of our audience said. But finish it, Adesoji, sorry.
So that is what the BRICS is there for. The BRICS is not saying everybody can come and join. In fact, they said no to a couple of people.
Mm-hmm.
Why did they say no? That is not the sort of thing we want to do here. So they've seen you. They've seen how you moved previously. And so it's a counterweight. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be even the doctor, your doctor will, if you go to your doctor, it would say, use this medicine 3 times daily, twice daily, 1 time daily. But they will also say, if the symptom persists, consult. Exactly. So is BRICS nah, it's not.
Yeah.
But does BRICS give you, and does it give you a window to understanding how to navigate? Yes.
And does it give you some leverage as well?
Exactly. So imagine if, using my analogy earlier with regards to the drugs thing, someone in India comes in and puts their generic viral drug on the table. And with the amount of dollars you have in your pocket, you see that is a veritable idea for you. But a pharmaceutical company comes in and says, oh, no. I can sell my drugs for far less than what India is offering you. Who is the winner? You in the middle, because you have a choice.
And that is what the US should have done. Those farmers, instead of bullying, that's where we need to squeeze them to come to. Yeah.
But at the moment, you don't have that choice.
Yeah.
So it's not, people should not go overboard. I'm not, suggest, but at the moment, we are not, we are not.
But you would agree, Adesoji, we would have that choice aligned with stronger partners, which is therefore the benefit of being Brics members.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, where, okay, so history exists for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You know where you're coming from, right? So when somebody comes in and says, do you know there's an option? And you say, oh, tell me, sell it to me. And they sell you the option. And it's not as if you're going in and you're roped in that you cannot leave. You go in, you trade, and they are also key in their trade. Their trade agreements are open. So which means you can leave anytime. Unlike in some places where, you
get sanctioned if you dare even mention the idea of leaving.
Not even if you mention it, if you think it.
Yeah. So let's get to the questions, because there are a lot of them today, and I actually was excited because it's going to be informative and we get deeper into the conversation. Karen L asks, how does this affect African countries and it was going to what you were saying just now, African countries having Western control imposed upon them militarily, and what protection, would they have against the larger Brics countries from doing the same? I see this. What is to stop from this being a situation like what it has been before with the imperialists?
Well, we began the conversation by saying the blueprints, the premise the foundation on which Brics is built was the Bandung Conference of 1955 in Indonesia. Now, what was the key tenet of that conference? It was non-alignment, which means you can be either here nor there. You don't have, the popular saying is no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. So,
like for example, what France is doing to Niger, where it says only we can have access to. Yeah. So that is not
so
there.
No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interest. And so these countries effectively are saying, we offer you the alternative that we're not going to place any soldiers on your territory. But if you ask us to help, we can obviously help. And Russia has a history of helping. There's a reason why the Kalashnikov is in the flag of Mozambique. Hello. There is a reason why South Africa is free today. It's the Battle of Guadalcanal, which the Russians provided the weapons that the Cubans used in, fighting. ZANU-PF, there's a reason why they're in control in Zimbabwe today. We could go through an entire litany of people coming in and saying, okay, you want our help, this is our help. The thing about the Western media is this, and here is where I might go off on a tangent, is that because we don't read, sound bites don't help form accurate understanding of what it is we're looking at. China, and to a lesser extent, Russia, don't have a military base on Africa. And yet they've been dealing with Africa since
just one actually by China now. Just one.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I said to a lesser extent.
Yeah.
So, and to a lesser extent, Russia doesn't have a base on the African continent.
One could argue, this is me, right? Because we have to look at both sides of the argument. You're right, they don't have a base, but one could argue that the Wagner group has been doing all their bidding in Africa. One could argue that. But
the Wagner is not a base. Wagner is just a group of people running around. To have a base, you do what the Americans are doing in Niger. You have boots on the ground.
And you're spying on the people, and you're calling that base your territory, and the
You
people
have
who own the land, it's not theirs. Yes.
so the United States have, I mean, it's common knowledge anyway. They have a base in Morocco.
Mhm.
The Brits have a base in Kenya. They have a base in Djibouti. They have what's it called? They used to have a base in South Africa. I don't know about the veracity of it right now, but the Americans have Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia actually was another colonial injustice, was the Brits removing a set of people from an island that used to be known as Chaguan Islands, that they've now renamed as Diego Garcia.
Maybe we can do a show on that, but yeah.
And if you go to the west, on Ascension Island, just off the coast of Africa, there's another American base there.
Yeah.
So, but Russia doesn't have a base. So this is oh, Russians. No. Based on what? What are you talking about?
Yeah. All right. So let's go to the next one. So myself and Adesoji, brother Adesoji, will be completing the show today. Unfortunately, our brother Milton has been taken by the conspiring forces of Western connections and internet, which means that we as Africans, maybe through Brics or maybe through our African Union, must find a solution to internet connection that belongs to us. Adesoji, and how does Modis's recent, I didn't hear about this, Modis's recent proposal of including the AU in the G20, I'm just hearing about this, affect or engage Brics? I don't see that it would mess up India's membership, but you...
That does what? I don't get it. I don't
and
get it.
How does Modis's recent proposal of including the AU in the G20 affect or engage Brics? How does it affect or engage Brics?
Okay, as a bloc?
Yeah.
As a bloc, not really. I
don't think they're going to do that, but also I don't see them punishing India for suggesting that they join.
No. As a bloc, African countries are part of the G20. Some of them are invited on rotation, but they've largely been part of the G20.
Yeah.
But as a bloc, why? There is not...
As an ineffective bloc, actually, not just a bloc, because AU is not working as a bloc.
Well, that's what I'm saying, as a bloc, in the sense that, not that I will say they're largely ineffective. It's just that the influence they could exercise has been watered down by so much interference.
They have no influence, yeah.
So if you look at cases of, what's it called? Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, which other country can I mention? Egypt, Morocco, Libya, basically non-existent. So as a bloc, it's, yes, they will be nice. Symbolically, it would be nice for them to be there, but as a bloc, I don't think they can. They don't have the wherewithal to, impact anything. So, because individually they're detected and they're dictated too. So it will follow on that whoever is dictating to them is part of the G20. So when you get in there, what are you going to say? Are you going to say anything different to what it is you've been told by whoever is next to you, that, this is how I want you to vote? You're not going to do that. So I don't think their presence there would, but if they're part of Brics,
it would be helpful.
It will be quite different.
Yeah.
Then you're playing with a different set of, sets of rules. So
we have someone else who pointed out the reaching out, including Argentina, because they don't think Argentina is bringing anything to the table. But you spoke to that, so we won't go to that question, because you spoke to what Argentina is bringing to the table.
Yeah. Argentina is bringing lithium. Argentina is bringing lithium, and the fact that, well, with the way the world is going, lithium is, anyone who has lithium is going to be a valuable resource to the next economy.
Yeah.
And so if you hold reserves of it, it follows to say you'll be vital to the growth of any economic bloc. And so with them owning 35%, and that's, quite sizable.
Yeah.
It will be important if they then bring in places like Zambia and Congo.
For the same reasons, right?
Then we're really talking.
Yeah.
Then you can,
Has Congo been considered, Adesoji?
Not to my mind. Not to
All
my
right.
mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone says, Akata says, I always have trouble with that name. But problem with this group is all of the non-African members have bad records with Africa, with varying degrees and magnitudes. Should we just ignore this?
Well, if we wait till everybody gets their chips right, we're not going to move on anything. And
So
time
it's
is
the
time
enemy
is
of my enemy,
time is no. I mean, time is of the
or the
essence.
lesser of the enemies.
Like I said earlier, it's not a perfect union.
Yes.
It's not the panacea to all problems.
Yeah.
It is also not promising to do everything.
Yeah.
It is one issue. How can we look at it differently? And what is the alternative to the way it has always been looked at, or how it's been looked at? So let's focus on the what, not the who, or So the what and the why are important, not the who.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, the who is always important, but I see your point. You make a good point. Just to add to that, my advice to African nations, what at least I would hope to see, is that they use this to relieve the pressure that has been on them as far as building their economies. The one thing I was happy to see is that China is now focusing on the fact that Africa does not want, they said, Africa does not want infrastructure. That's not their main focus. Their main focus is industrialization. And if I see the Chinese funding of the different projects in Africa, and by the way, when we talk about Chinese funding in Africa, China is getting resources back. So it's not like this is aid. This is not aid. This is trade. So what does China want from Africa, and what does Africa want from China? And China now is looking at focusing on industrializing Africa. I was happy to see that, and I hope they do that. And you're right. They're not perfect partners, but in this moment, while we're trying to liberate Africa, can we do something that puts us in a position where we have more leverage, and then we finally say, hey, we're standing on our own. This is how we want things to look like. So I agree with you on that. I'm trying to get to the other questions and speak at the same time, which is proving challenging. Muata Garai pointed out, I think this was just, he was being sarcastic, the US to China, as you were talking about, China does not have a military that goes on waters to other places. They stay just to defend themselves. The US to China, why is your land so close to our warship after they've taken their warship?
Well, so which is another misnomer. The United States has what they known as the Monroe Doctrine. So the Monroe Doctrine is, the key aspect of it that people can take away is, excuse me, no foreign entity can place weapons or military in the South American sphere or in the Western Hemisphere, which is, UK, France, and what have you, on this way. No other foreign country, because you're seen to be in America's territory. I don't know what that means, but
their ship. I'm telling you, these Americans are quite something. They bring their ship to your place and they claim that that's their territory.
So, but if you contrast that with China and Russia, it's what are we doing?
Yeah.
So it's like, if you bring the problem to us, yes, we'll defend ourselves. But that kind of imperialistic adventures is for you. We don't do that. We'll trade with you. And again, people would say, oh, China deals based on your needs. If you tell China, this is what I want from you. And again, while we're being strategic, it's also that if you tell China, I want this, and China looking at its needs, determines that needs to be in line with whatever it is you've demanded, we'll work with you. But the West, on the other hand, would come in and say, listen, I want this stuff and I don't care what you're thinking about it. Mm-hmm. Can I have it? Oh, but here you go. gone to your head?
Someone's comment in the chat about Le Monde. You were talking about them, but that's an example of some false narrative that they were putting out, which you were talking about. Just wanted to put that out there for our audience that watches this. I'm trying to get the questions.
So,
why don't you say a little bit about, as we have a few minutes, as I'm getting a question.
Okay, so
actually,
check it up.
Thank you.
When he was talking about, what he spoke to in his book, Africa, Black Africa, a case for a federated state, economic federated state, mentioned that it is important that African leaders look to build their economy first, and also be willing to seize sovereignty, where it means bringing in more help. Are there people who did it? Nkrumah suggested it, and he also left a legacy in the Constitution of Ghana, which is when Africa decides it is going to embrace the idea of a federated state, we will collapse our borders. There have been wars fought across borders in Africa. And these borders were not there before 1885, right? Yeah. So when you're fighting based on those borders, I can give you an example of how ludicrous some of them are. Burkina Faso and Mali, 1474, which is what brought Thomas Sankara to the imagination of the world. And in it, he said, I don't see what the point of this war is. Yeah. Because we are fighting over a patch of land that cannot grow anything. What's it called? Congo has been invaded by literally everybody that has a border next to it. Everybody. I kid you not. Rwanda. Okay. Funny enough, we mentioned Rwanda. Rwanda class itself as a producer of lithium on the world, cobalt on the world stage. But yet Rwanda does not have a cobalt mine. But the West does not see anything with that.
No, they do. They just don't want to acknowledge it.
Exactly.
Right?
So even at some point, even Zimbabwe invaded Congo. Don't ask me how, but they did. So it's ridiculous that those borders in themselves has been allowed to hold. And that is what Cheke Diop is saying. They're not being held for the progress of the people that are in, but they're being kept for the people who are outside. The people Nkrumah referred to as not having left, but only gone outside. And they're outside telling you what to bring to them outside. What is inside to bring to them outside. So,
in fact, they left some of their family members in the house, and they're using them to control us. As you speak about the sovereignty, Sheikh Diop also says, as long as that, if we unite in a federated state of African nations, as long as the people coming are those same neo-colonialists who have self-interest, it's not going to work. And he said that's why the previous ones have failed. He also said there has to be an agreement, a set of agreements that are put in place that hold people accountable. And without them, it would not work. One last one, and then we're going to end because we're a little past time. But I did want us to touch on this, which is why I'm going to bring it up. Brics, as I understand it, may seemingly be anti-Western imperialist, but not anti-capitalist, nor anti-poverty necessarily. Will Brics eradicate poverty in the global south? So as I was doing the research, let me bring that back up, sorry. As I was doing the research, I encountered they're still working with the IMF. They're still working with the structures that oppress and subjugate. And this goes back to it's not a perfect marriage, but it's a marriage and let's make it work. So, Adesoji.
Yeah, they're working with them insofar as, if you're a member of the United Nations, you're automatically a member of IMF and the World Bank. You might not access their loans, but you're automatically a part of it. So you see all the internal workings of said organization. So again, it goes back to looking at this body called Brics, understanding what, in terms of our history, what Brics brings to the table, essentially just brings an alternative, which is a breath of fresh air, a help to understanding that if that side doesn't work for you, you have an alternative here. So that is essentially what Brics is in a nutshell. I mean, we probably won't be able to cover the entire workings of what Brics will do going forward.
Mm-hmm.
But will they eradicate poverty? Question is, what is poverty? If you're still looking through the lenses of the West to determine who is poor and who is rich in the world, you lose sight of what is very important. My needs are my needs. I might not want to drive a Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
I might not want to own a Rolex. My richness might be the fact that I have food. Mm-hmm. I have a house over my home, over my head. As my people would say, those become first world problems.
Mm-hmm.
What shirt you wear, what trousers. No. As long as people can feed themselves and their dignity is not compromised,
yes,
you're as rich as you can be.
Yes.
Stop looking through the prism of the West to determine what your standards of living are. The West is going through a flummox with regards to understanding how it operates. Mm-hmm. And so, hey.
That's a great closing point, Adesoji. And thank you all, Asanteni, for joining us today. Unfortunately, our brother Milton was disconnected from us, but he will be back. And he did share some thoughts before the technology took him off again. This is Kumbukeni, your podcast covering Africa and everything Africa from an African perspective, changing the false narrative that has been propagated on Africans and the African continent for years. You can send us an email on kumbukeni1@gmail.com. You can join our Patreon family at patreon.com/Kumbukeni, or you can subscribe here. We are a few subscriptions from 1,000. Help us get to that 1,000 at youtube.com/@Kumbukeni1. What does that 1,000 mean? It means that we start generating an income. It means that we have more time and more resources to provide this information to you and to do the research that is required and make the connections that are required to come and provide you more information to educate us and decolonize our minds. So thank you so much for coming. Siku njema, kwaherini.